The rubric of activism is medicine, I think we have we have a challenge around human understanding, right? So is this a problem or a predicament? Right. The second thing is emotional and psychological regulation, right? And then there's what to do and how to do it. And then finally, how to live. New ways of being, right?
Right.
As a human animal. And tribe. And civilization. So sort of that upwelling. So today, which is June 9th, 2023, we have Frank and J-Lo. And I'm listed as Jonathan Wood Logan. Isn't that funny? And we're talking around the ideas of activism as medicine and some of the inputs and frameworks around that. Because not only have we personally encountered some of these issues, but we see some of these issues writ large in the way that environmental organizations have worked or not worked, around the way that society reacts or doesn't react, and the way individuals try and cope and manage and work with this overarching disaster, ongoing, unfolding, increasing, accelerating disaster. We could stop there and just break for a beer, but you know, and then what do we do? How do we do it? And how do we, as an animal within the environment, a human animal, recapturing that sense of what it means to be an animal and a human in the environment, and it both in ourselves and our awareness of that, in context with each other and the background and the foreground of life itself on the planet, in all the environments and the built environment, and then what it means as a tribe and a civilization, right? So there's all these different layers and levels. How does that sound? And what would you call your opening thoughts?
Right. Well, we could dive into the predicament itself and look at the origin story of the predicament, because we're just starting out on this journey of activism as medicine. And so maybe that would be a place to start. It's like, we've got the predicament and we've got the encounter with the knowledge about that predicament.
Yes.
But if we take a step back, let's look at the origin story. How did we get here? And I think a lot of people are going to be asking this question in coming years. It's like, we've got this catastrophe that's unfolding. So what led us to this point?
Where would you, yes, I love that. Where would you stick a pin? What date or place or event? Maybe Haber-Bosch in the Haber-Bosch process of being able to fix nitrogen, right? That radically changed the way we deal with food. Maybe it's oil, or maybe it's way before then. Where would you put a pin in the date for the beginning of the if not the problem, the set of dominoes that began to lead us to the place where we found solutions that became problems?
Right, the tombstone dominoes that people have talked about.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a lot of people would put the pin at the beginning of agriculture. So 10,000 years ago, we have this fundamentally altered relationship with habitat. So prior to that, habitat was something that gave us our food, gave us our life, and it was like this vast supermarket. All we had to do was walk around and take what we could. But then with the advent of agriculture, then we had the first glimpse of mastery over habitat. And that in itself, at least for a lot of people, changed everything.
Right. How different is agriculture then from squirrels hiding nuts and bees making honey?
Well, right, then it becomes a question of the magnitude, the intensification of agriculture, because you know, for 5,000 years it was just it was manual labor agriculture,
Right.
and that was not that impactful.
Right.
Really, you know, small human population working with manual methods. There's only so much damage you can do. But
Right.
then 5,000 years ago, then we get the use of animal agriculture, and now this intensification of the process.
Right. Right. I would add also two things to that. One is that not just animal agriculture, because that was certainly the great accelerator, right? Where we can suddenly take this wild cow oxen thing and make it a beast of burden, turn its wildness into our labor.
Right.
Where it began to do we have a term called horsepower, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like that was oxen and horsepower that suddenly were far in excess of what you and I mean, I couldn't pull a plow that way. You couldn't pull a plow that way, but an 1,800-pound muscle animal can, right? In a way that we can't. I think the second thing, around the first thing, is also irrigation.
Right.
Because irrigation allowed us to spread out both the distance and the space that we could commit to agricultural land, but also the amount of time we could grow, the growing season, and thus the different crops we could grow. Right. So dry land wheat is unique in that dry land wheat you plant and then you just sit back and you go hunting, you go do it, make pots and hang out, and it grows and then you harvest it. So there's a planting and a harvesting, and there's some prep time in the beginning and there's some after time. But for the most part, it's probably a 4-month effort beginning to end. That leaves you 8 months. When you start expanding into these other crops, they take a more full-time effort, and that requires stratification in society that wasn't necessary with dry land wheat,
right,
or barley, or other gathering. Even the initial agriculture before you, as you said, with the plow, that means you've got a lot more work. You've also got to feed those animals off season, just to save even more and grow even more. And then you've got to defend it, because what happens is, if you and I are a bunch of if we have a village of 120 people and we're building these vast stores of food, then the people who are like the horse people that ride in and go, lots of food, and you made beer, we'll take it, and we'll take care of it. Boom, and your swords, and they cut our throats and leave us in the ditch. And so we have to have another class of people, which is the warrior class or the guards, that, and then we need to, if we're going to do agriculture, we also extensive agriculture, we need priests, because they've got to have the seasons and the sun and when do the rains come and the sacrificing of the chickens, So you begin to build this stack of necessary things to support the one thing.
Well, you also have what you might say the invention of wealth, the invention of affluence, which no one ever had before, because the only possessions you could have were things that you could carry from one place to another. And now all of a sudden, with these sedentary cultures, you can have wealth and affluence, and that began to build on itself.
Yes. Surplus creates wealth.
Right. And then you need to have people to protect that surplus. You need soldiers and you need military and everything else. And we went down that road, and you might call that the breaking of the world. Some 5,000 years ago led us to where we are today.
I forget, and there's a second piece of that, which is the movement into religion away from spirituality. I forget, Nate Hagen's talked about it, and I remember I don't remember all the details, but he talked about how, and he was, I think, referencing someone else who said, the minute you take a wild oxen or a wild horse or something that was just free, and and was a sacred brother or sister, right? Sister owl, father crow, mother, whatever. It's like, then you take them and now you are making them beasts of burden. You have objectified them, right, into a value proposition and away from their inherent brother-sisterness. So now we've literally separated ourselves from nature. We are the conquerors of nature. We are the commanders of the land and the water and everything else.
And that was the beginning of human supremacy, the philosophy, if you will, the psychology of human supremacy, which I have a friend named Derek Jensen, and he writes about this extensively. He says that is the number one problem on the planet today, is this assumption of human supremacy backed up by all these other cultural forces that feed into that. And then the corollary to that, that all these natural all this natural living systems around us are only there to serve humans. So that's quite a shift in a few thousand years.
Right. So from being inside the subjective, right? Being inside the subjective experience of all that is, to breaking with nature, to splitting off, carving off the spirituality of those connections and creating religion. We didn't have religion before, we create religion. And religion is the way that we hold that supremacy. It's the story we tell ourselves. It's the meme set. It's the educational system that teaches the new young ones that we are the superior ones, that these are here for our use, that we are in command and control, and that whether or not our work to do that is valid and good and proves itself is at the behest of the gods. And so now there's a moral implicate order that has to be put in place, right? So we have these extrinsic rules, right, that have to these exogenous rules that have to be forced onto human nature.
Right. Yeah. And so all of that got accelerated during the ancient Greeks, fed into that, and then of course the scientific revolution just was gasoline on the fire to all of the human supremacy stuff, and it just gave us the tools then to amplify that even further to what we have today.
Yeah, and also up until the Renaissance, at least in Western, I can't speak to Eastern religions and spirituality, but in Western religion with Catholicism, up until the Renaissance, it was still the whole. The world was still whole, and it was all known by and through God, and by and through His order, His implicate order of the bishops and the priests and so forth. Right, there was an order and a hierarchy, but Protestantism breaks with that as a result of the Renaissance, because now we can know things in the world. We can scientifically go and know and measure this. We can measure that. We can let the speed of the moon around the earth. We can get the size, we can do all these things. We now suddenly can begin to learn and master and explore the physical world, which hyper accelerates this idea of supremacy.
Right.
We even break with God in Protestantism and objectify God. Right? I mean, it's a whole different, you can look at the way that the Catholic world generally looks at nature versus the way the Protestant world looks at nature generally, especially the evangelical world, and it's a radically different exposure. Evangelicalism generally is very oriented towards dominionist, whereas the Catholic world is very oriented more towards family still. And that's a big broad brush, but there's that separation is worthy of at least acknowledging, in the same way we might say that in Buddhism and in Shintoism and in Taoism, they're still much more oriented towards nature. And some kind of at least a respect and an understanding of nature, as part of culture and society, not wholly, right? I mean, the whale hunts that the Japanese still do shows us that they are able to do a Cartesian, separation. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, the simplest story, I think, the old story, the native indigenous story, was a kinship model.
Right.
And it's all about, you teach your children that you are kin with the natural world. They are your brothers and sisters, not just metaphorically, but literally.
Actually,
we drifted away from that. We discarded that model until very recently now, where modern ecological science, paradoxically, is coming to the same conclusion that we have this kinship perspective now in that in ecological science.
Right.
And it's almost like we've come full circle now.
Right.
And now we're back to the beginning of the kinship model and trying to find a way to heal the wounds and heal the damage that we've done with this supremacist model.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something too, I think is worthy of noting, is that the supremacist model also means supremacy against each other and the division of each other.
Right.
So that not only are we humans supreme over all of nature, but different groups of humans can be supreme over others, right? And the pinnacle of that was Hitler and the whole sociopathic, Third Reich and the Uberman and all that kind of crazy. And then, of course, the horror of the Holocaust is proof of the evil that supremacy can lead to, that objectification and that complete evil.
Right.
Which is what we're doing to the land, in a sense. I mean, not saying they're the same thing, obviously, but we're doing a similar kind of a Holocaust upon the earth for the mythology of our supremacy and our separateness and our ability to stay separate, not just to be separate, but to stay separate. I mean, it's one thing to jump underwater and breathe, and hold your breath and then come back up. That doesn't mean that you can stay separate from oxygen. It means you were for a moment separate from the atmosphere and you came back to it,
Right. So then the question, I guess, for the activist is how do we heal that rift? How do we rejoin the circle of life? How do we rejoin the circle of kinship? And step down off the pedestal of human supremacy.
Yes, that's right. And I think part of that is, we've talked about spiral dynamics, and we've talked about the developmental model of how humans develop. And part of what happens is that when we first made that break, as you mentioned, 10,000 years ago with agriculture, that was a huge psychological break. It was a total shift in identity, both for the group and for the individual. And it took us from subjective in the land and in the world to objective separate from it. And we've gone through several levels of that development to the point now where we have online multiple different worldviews, right? Large sets of worldviews. And each large set of worldview can see climate and ecological collapse in its own, but only through its own lens, right? Only through its own worldview. And so the perspective that we take gives us the optionalities that are available within that reality. In other words, if you don't know about antibiotics and someone gets an infection, they're just done. They could die from the infection. However, if you have awareness of the infection, then and the antibiotics, then you can go get the antibiotics and give them a solution because it's within the realm of your possibilities and your worldview. If you're a physician, you would probably even check to see first if that person's allergic to penicillin and the derivatives of penicillin before giving them the antibiotic, so you don't also kill them from that, right? Through anaphylactic shock. So the worldviews give us the optionalities and the sets of beliefs, and solutions. So my thought about that is that when we think of the activist engaging with the world writ large, there are multiple levels that they engage with it. It's me and the world, you, me, each individual and the world. It's us in whatever we call our small in group, and then it's us in the next circle out, and then it's us and it's us. And where that circle of concern ends, like some people don't give a shit about anybody in Africa, in America. They just don't care about anybody. They don't care about anybody in any other part of America. That's not them. There are people whose worldview is radically small. So the optionality of solutions for them has to remain within that locus, that small circle. So they don't have a lot that they can do relative to someone whose worldview is much larger and says, well, I'm going to go plant trees in Africa, or I'm going to go plant trees in India, or I'm going to build wells, that kind of stuff. So the thing that we come up against is when we as activists see a problem that is outside the realm of our emotional, psychological worldview and world set of possibilities to engage with, we go into the fight, flight, freeze, the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn. Yeah, right. And I think freak out's another one, right? And then, of course, we have the choices. If we know how to regulate ourselves emotionally, if we can get help from someone else like you've got a vast amount of experience, you understand martial arts and the human body and the nervous system. If someone has someone like you as a resource, or materials that you create as a resource, that gives them a chance then to move out of that space. But if they don't, typically what happens is people retreat from it because it's frightening. And now they're going to move into adaptive strategies. So who here, anybody watching this, it's like, you might feel like, well, crap, I need a drink now, or oh, I'm going to go smoke a cigarette, or oh, I'm going to go for a run, or oh, I'm going to go whatever, gamble, or all the different off-gassing things that we do to manage the over-regulation or the overstimulation when we don't have tools for regulation.
Yes. So the activist has this enormous challenge, and it's easy to see why activism is in many circles it's discouraged, and it's people have a lot of trouble with those of us who stand up to challenge human supremacy, challenge these narratives of isolation, and the suggestion that we really are kin with the natural world. It's really challenging to be an activist in this modern world because a lot of people don't want to hear this messaging.
I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
60, I'm 61 years old, and I want to go, oh, to be 20 again back in 1982. Oh man, it was such a, who knew the world was so simple then, and we still had some time to do some things. I think you're right. And it gets us back to the question of problem versus predicament. And then what strategies can we apply? Right. So do you want to talk about the problem versus predicament?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the way I understand it is a problem is something that is potentially solvable, and that you could go back to the previous state, whatever that was. You solve the problem and you don't have to worry about it anymore. You go back to normal.
Right.
But in a predicament, there is no going back to normal. There's no unringing the bell. There is no forgetting about that knowledge. Right. You just have to create some new pathway and some new attitude, some new approach to your situation.
Right, right. So I think simply put, a problem is your car's overheating in the desert and needs water. You can go get a canteen of water and put water in the radiator, and that, or it needs oil. You can go buy, whatever it is, a quart of oil and pour it in there, and you can get more oil in the engine and get the car going again. A predicament is your car has burned, the engine has melted, and you're out in the desert. That's not okay. You got to come up with a whole new, as you said, a whole new strategy, a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of moving forward.
Right, which calls for not just individual changes to our beliefs and lifestyle, but widespread cultural change. We need basically a new culture to deal with this, because our old culture is what got us here, and that implies we need some wholesale revisions of our cultural stories. Not just how we live, but why we live, why we do what we do. And if we're going to have any kind of a future, it's got to be different. And that's both terrifying, and it's maybe a little bit exhilarating too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we have to, part of what happens is that when we're confronted with the disillusionment of our prior illusion that our society gave us, right? Unlimited abundance, unlimited consumerism. You can be a millionaire. You can travel the world and have all this, and you can do anything and buy anything, do anything you want, provided you work hard, make money. That's the old Protestant work ethic and the whole Western civilization, now globalist worldview. Not globalist as in the people that attack the globalists, whoever they might be, but global, the modern global industrial consumerist world. And understanding that that is a mythology that cannot maintain because of the predicament. The predicament has put us in a situation, a condition that will no longer allow that future to happen en masse. And so, as you said, we have to find a new way of seeing the world, meaning our vision for the world, our mythology of the world, our story of the world. Then that's going to translate into how we are being individually, together, and what that means we create for the future together.
Right. So what about activism? Why should a person engage in activism at this moment in history? Because when we look at the magnitude and the gravity of our predicament, it's easy for people to shrink back and just say, hey, that's too much for me to even process. I can't metabolize that idea that the biosphere is in real trouble. It's too much for me. Why should I bother to be an activist, which is going to expose me to risk, and I won't get paid? It's hard work, right? Why should anybody do it?
Yeah, it is. It's hard emotional work.
Yes.
It's hard to be in a place of confusion, uncertainty, stepping out in public in whatever way. And I think it calls, there's 3 transformations that have to happen. First is the inner transformation. And that, as you said, deals with a lot of the emotions and the psychology and spirituality. That's an inner transformation. I have to develop more. I have to move. The higher the level of personal development we are, the more likely we are to be able to be fluid and allowing of what actually is. Not allowing like, oh, I'm allowing Dave to beat up Steve. No, it's allowing of, the world is at this place. I don't like it, but if I spend all my time resisting it, like in martial arts, the more I fight against something, the more that thing owns me. Right? That's the concept of the tar baby. You fight the tar baby, you become all tarred and feathered. It doesn't work out well. So that non-practicing non-duality and practicing non-resistance and accepting the isness of the condition we're in, it's sort of like, what is it? The 12-step programs. I think that one of the first steps is admitting they have a problem. Maybe we need a 12-step program for climate. Right? For climate activism, which is to admit that there is a problem. And that part of that problem exists in my beliefs and my feelings about what I thought I was going to have for the future, what TV is still marketing me getting as the future, what the politics and the economics are still saying we have to have as a future, but which I intellectually first and then emotionally and psychologically and then spiritually understand is that's not possible. And so what is possible? That causes us then to look for a value shift. What do I value? I value friendship, right? I value learning. I value contribution and making a difference. I value balance and wholeness. And, I value healing the earth and taking care of the poor and educating the children and caring for the elderly and the vulnerable, right? I care about righting wrongs in rational ways, right? So that's a different program than I want a 10,000 square foot house, a 17-car garage, my own Gulfstream 7, that kind of thing. So as activists, maybe we have to decide what's most important to us. Our connections, our relationships, love, care, and concern, compassion, communication, connection, being in space together around the campfire, right? So to speak, or in reality, right?
Right. And that's the big payoff, I think. We've heard this phrase going around now, resistance is fertile. And I love that because activism is, of course, stressful and inconvenient and ambiguous and everything else, everything that goes with fighting. But it's also, it also gives to us. It's extremely educational. It's experiential education. Think of all the things that you learn when you engage in an action of some kind. You learn how systems work. You learn how government works. You learn how corporations work. You learn how the law works. You learn individual psychology and social psychology. And these are all things that I suppose you could go to college to learn these things, but why not learn them experientially, which makes it more powerful, more immediate. And that's something that is so invaluable. You couldn't learn those things really any other way.
Right.
And then the people that you meet, I mean, the activist pathway puts you in contact with some remarkable people who are actually engaged authentically with the world. That's priceless.
Yes.
So I guess this is kind of my sales pitch for activism, you might say. And it's something that we need to do because so what happens is so many people, I went to my first protest march having to do with the Iraq war. This was some years ago when the war was really hot. And there were hundreds of thousands of people. I went to one in Seattle, one in Washington, and it was inspiring as hell. It was super fun to be out there with all these people. But then you look at the newspaper the following day, it looks like, well, we didn't really have much of an effect. What happened? Did we really move the world at all? I don't know. So then you start to look at what are my strategies, what are my tactics, and how can I live this way that's both good for me and good for the world. And that's what we're trying to get here.
Yeah, you raised a really good point. I worked with a couple other people to help co-found Extinction Rebellion in America.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found was people would come in, go to an action or an experience, and then said, well, it didn't change anything, and they quit.
Right.
And I think it's like it's a paradox. You become something by doing it.
Nice.
Right? You become something by doing it, but you have to keep doing it. Someone can't stop. Someone doesn't say, well, I didn't have a cigarette in the past hour, I must be a non-smoker. That's not how it works. I mean, it can, but it's generally not how it works, right? You don't go to the gym once or go to an Aikido training once and go, well, I went to the training, I must be an Aikido black belt by now. That's not how it works. You become by doing, and that goes through the levels of instantiation in the body and the embodiment of it, and then to the point where it moves into emptiness and you just become it, right? In the same way, activism, given it's a predicament, if it's a problem, an event could solve it. Mm-hmm. If it were a problem, we could all walk out in the street, do something together, and force the solution to happen, right? But because it's a predicament and there is no clear path through, there's pathways through, right? Adaptation, mitigation, resilience, changing of culture, all these things, that each person can find their own way to become an activist. For example, someone can be an activist by supporting the website. Someone could be an activist by donating $25 a month and encouraging other people to become activists. Someone could be an activist by going in and sitting in Chase Bank and saying, I'm not leaving until you arrest me, or you commit to divesting from fossil fuels and investing in green energy in communities. Mm-hmm. So there's 1,000 different, what was it? I think it was George H.W. Bush, we need the 10,000 points of light. And he was right. He was right, though, right? We all become a candle that lights other candles by doing something that shows people it's okay to do, that inspires people to take action, that makes us different. If we're the same people 3 years from now or 5 years from now, the planet's doomed, right? And we have to grow and change and become more authentic and more like be like a child to enter heaven. Meaning, in other words, drop all the bull, all the pretensions, I have to look so pretty, all the Instagram photos, whatever, and just get real and find out that, that's our natural state. Don't you think we've kind of lost our natural state, and that's part of why we're not effective in this? Yes. In the world today?
That's the paradox of the modern world, because we have all this knowledge, you might say, but a lot of it's inert knowledge, and there's a lot of things we've forgotten how to do. I mean, Michael Pollan, writing about food and nutrition, he marvels at the idea that modern people don't know what to eat anymore. We don't know how to eat. And the same thing is true in the world of exercise and fitness. We've forgotten how to move our bodies. We've forgotten how to engage with the world. We've forgotten how to have conversations with one another. And so that's the paradox. Now we've kind of disempowered ourselves. And yes, we need to get back to simple, authentic, genuine engagement with the world. And we have to normalize this practice of activism, because right now, if you look on the internet for pictures of activists, you're going to find the typical stuff, the cliches, where somebody's holding a sign and yelling through a megaphone, and that's it. But we need to expand that view of activism. It's got to be a bigger idea. And then maybe we can draw more people into it.
Yeah, let me give you an example. In the military, you might have, if there were some sort of a conflict, you might have 50,000 soldiers in the field, but that takes about 1 million people behind them to support them, right? With all the infrastructure, the supply chain management, food, water, logistics, I mean, the whole thing, right? Communications, there's a massive amount. Look at an aircraft carrier. What are there? 50 planes on an aircraft carrier, right? 50 pilots. You have 50
Yeah.
pilots, but you've got 5,000 people on an aircraft carrier to support those 50 people.
Right.
And the same thing is true with activism. Yes, there will be people who go out in the street to get arrested. Yes, there will be people who sit in the governor's office and with petitions. Yes, there will be all these things, but they all need the support of community, relationships, hugs, sandwiches, posters, flags. I mean, there's just so much to be done. And that's just that one little area of protest, let alone the whole thing of saying, I'm not going to eat this anymore. I'm not going to buy blueberries in winter from my grocery store because I know they come from freaking Peru or New Zealand, and I'm not buying fruit and vegetables that are flown to America, right? That's just one of 10,000 ideas. But the key here is that it is 10,000 things. It's all, as my niece calls it, all the little things. And the little things are the beingness and the doingness together. When they blend together, being and doing, it radically transforms us. We step into a new way of being, and then we become that, and we feel different. Let me ask you this. How does it feel to go camping with your 5 best friends? How does it feel to walk on the beach in your bare feet on a warm, not super hot, burning sand day, but a warm day, or to swim in a beautiful lake, or to go hiking in a forest, to go forest bathing, or just to feel dirt under your feet? It feels amazing. How often do we do that?
Right. Not so much anymore. Yeah.
Right? And that's what those emotional things, to smell flowers, those are the sensory equivalents of the psychological and emotional equivalent of being an activist. That when you do things together for a positive purpose, it changes you.
Right.
You become something more. Yeah.
And the key idea here, I think, is exposure and integration. Because the body is a kludge. The body is a collection of systems that have been put together by evolution. And what we call health is that integration of these systems, right? And what serves to integrate those systems? Well, we know, for example, that exercise or vigorous movement calls on all those systems to work together. And we know that works. It's totally clear. But activism can do the same thing, because when we expose ourselves to challenge and the optimal level of stress by trying to change things, what you're doing is calling on those subsystems of the body to work together. So maybe you have to give a public speech. Maybe you have to go out and fight in the streets for something. Maybe you have to go and have a meeting with your congressman. All of these things are exposure, and all of those are calls to the body to integrate. And that's the value of activism.
Yes. Yeah. And the creation of community through activism, and the creation of new ways of living and new ways of seeing the world. And, we can have a really beautiful future, just not the one we've been sold.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
And things are going to change. Let me put it this way. Things are going to change radically. The question is, will we be people that are steering the course of that towards a positive, healthy future for those we love and each other and ourselves? Or will it be something that we just allow the larger, already, just not evil, but unconsciously destructive systems, right? Hyper capitalism, hyper consumerism, eating food so that now that something like 25 to 30% of Americans are morbidly obese, just all these terrible things that we've done to ourselves, like you said, don't even know how to eat anymore, or how to cook, or how food is made. Can we find a way through together and individually that brings us closer to each other, closer to life, closer to what it means to be a human animal, and reclaiming that and all that means, right? It's cool to do a great workout at 61 years old and sweat and feel pumped. It's amazing.
Yeah.
We got to reclaim that. We've been sold a bunch of bullshit about what comfort means, and it's all wrong.
Right.
And safety. It ain't safety. Our safety is killing us.
Right. And this is where the activist world and the health world need to come together, because what we're facing in the very short term, the near term, is just an escalation of stress beyond beyond what most people can imagine right now. I mean, people are under maximum stress right now, and if you amplify that 100-fold or 1,000-fold, it's going to be catastrophic, and people make really bad decisions when they're under stress. They behave badly when they're under stress, and that is what could really bring us down. So in a sense, climate is the first priority, biodiversity is the first priority, but human stress is also right at the top of the list too. We need to keep that under control.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ability to step into the unknown.
Yes. Our ambiguity tolerance.
Yeah. I love that. Our ambiguity tolerance, right? That goes up when we have more resources. That goes mental, emotional, spiritual, community, relationship, friendship, resources. Our ability to manage stress goes up. And there's a theory that says the reason why the United States was so successful during World War II was because of the Depression.
Yeah.
That Depression made us sense both the sacredness of all of us, but also the frailty of all of us. And that they knew that together, if we don't bind together to go solve that then problem, that all might be lost. And we have to find our togetherness now, despite the fact that the marketing and the politics and the power people and the social media all want to divide us for because we're the product, right? Our attention and our votes are the product, and our dollars are the product. They want that, and they are sociopathically, pathologically trying to grab that from us, take that from us. And we have to take back our authenticity and our individuality and our freedom, literally the freedom to actually just be without all that stuff.
Right. And I guess Extinction Rebellion has a new phrase they're working with: unite to survive, which I like.
Yeah.
And if we put the emphasis on human universals, we're going to be better off. There's a book out there called Human Universals. This anthropologist went around the world and he looked at all these different cultures and he said, yeah, everybody has language, everybody has families, everybody likes to play, everybody likes to sing. These are all human universals. And why don't we put our attention there? That would be probably more beneficial in the long run, I would think. So yes, getting away from all these divisive, trivial issues and focus on the human universals, that's a good place to start.
That's a brilliant place to start. And you've reminded me, there's two kinds of stress. Distress, right? Which is where we're at effect, something's happening to us, we can't control it, and it causes us, either it's actually happening, we think it's happening, and our stress level goes up, our cortisol goes up, our blood pressure goes up, our immune system goes down, all that kind of stuff. Our vision narrows, right? We go into the parasympathetic, the sympathetic nervous system, all those things, right? Fight, flight, freeze. And then there's eustress, which is joyful, happy at cause stress, right? Like working out in the gym, or helping to build an Amish farm, or, those kinds of things where we're doing things that are positive and healthy, but hard. And so we have a choice between being in distress and more and more and more and more and more distress, or to create the eustress, the hard work of building a better future. Because it's going to be different. It's not destroying capitalism, or it's not going to socialism. It's not destroying communism. It's actually something we haven't seen yet, and we have to build it to know what it looks like.
Yes, and it's essentially art, what we're doing. We don't know what we're creating, but we're sitting down at the canvas and damn it, we're going to create something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think it was in 1962, 61, maybe 61. Anyway, I'm not sure the actual date. I should go look it up. But President Kennedy, after Sputnik, and after the first trials of Mercury and so forth, turned to Wernher von Braun, who was the head of the space program at NASA. And he said, Dr. von Braun, what will it take to get us to the moon? I mean, I'm a little moonshot. Like, literally, we're going to go from being on the Earth in a tin can once or twice around the Earth to actually going and walking on the moon. And von Braun just said, the will to do it. It was eustress. It was hard. It was work. It was tens and hundreds of thousands of people all doing their little parts as moonshot activists. And that's what we need, is the will to be moonshot activists, the will to step into the eustress, the hard but positive stress of doing and being new things, of learning to speak, going to Toastmasters as an activist to learn how to speak, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why not, right? Or any of those things, or just going and bringing the cookies to a meeting, or just gathering people together for a happy hour to talk about climate and what can we do, right? And to understand the predicament, to become fluent about the four corners of the predicament, so we can speak about it rationally, but also so we can absorb it and let it pass through us emotionally and psychologically, so we can be one with the truth of what is.
Right.
Because so
Right.
long as we're at odds with the truth, we're owned. When we align with the truth, now we're empowered. Now we're in eustress. Now we can go out and do something effective about it to help, as you said, the art of co-creating a new civilization, a new way of being that's going to include parts of everything. We're not going to get rid of capitalism. We're not going to get rid of all those other things. We're going to make them yes and but change them radically.
Right. Right. And then in all of this is the courage to step up.
Yeah.
And that's I read a lot of Edward Abbey, Monkey Wrench Gang and Desert Solitaire and all that. And the way he put it, he said, courage is the master virtue because it makes all other virtues possible. If you have that courage and you're willing to engage and expose yourself to the world, then you've got a chance to integrate your body, you be more healthy, and maybe affect some change. Your courage will be contagious. It's you might think of it as a communicable strength as opposed to a communicable disease. And it's true. If I see somebody acting courageously, boy, I'm motivated, and that's what moves people.
Ah, I love it.
Well, a couple examples. When I see Paul Watson from the Sea Shepherd Society, and he goes out on the open ocean in a boat and challenges these factory vessels and these whale hunters and everything else. I mean, he's very courageous in that. But even, for example, Richard Horton, who's the editor of the Lancet in England, he talks about civil disobedience as being a legitimate healthcare practice, and that's courageous to talk that way, because you don't typically hear physicians talking that way. So that was exposure. That was good stuff.
That's well, and the Lancet is the premier medical journal of England.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, and you rarely hear doctors talking that way. So he took a professional risk and a personal risk to speak out that way, and we can all do
that. I like that. I think we should leave it there for today, because that's right. I think you nailed it.
Very nice. What a pleasure talking.